I'm joined today by Carol Woods. Carol was formerly a social worker. She's recently been released from a psychiatric unit. And why has that occurred? Because Carol has been trying to tell the truth about what's going on in British society. So today she's going to be telling us what has really been happening to her, and also covering in detail some of the extraordinary things that are going on under the surface through the British public sector, through the police, through child protection. And these are matters which she feels, and we certainly feel, that the British public needs to be aware of. Carol, thank you very much for joining us. Now, of course, we've met in audio, as it were, because you did an excellent presentation with Andy Peacher on Freedom Talk Radio a couple of nights ago, and I know that there's been a really tremendous response to that. So where do we start? Your story really goes back to about 2000.
Yes, it
and
does.
You were working as a senior social worker with Lancashire County Council. And you started to see things happening around child protection,
Yes,
and
yes.
in particular the records of children.
Yes.
What did you see?
Well, within 6 weeks of taking up the post in January 2000, I could see records that were appearing that somehow seemed to come from thin air. And given that they were my clients, I was the assigned caseworker. I puzzled over where these records had come from without my knowledge. Prior to January 2000 and taking up that post, I had worked for Preston Social Services in the past. Absolutely no complaints, everybody extremely professional, clients got a good service, social workers were happy. But that was approximately 1989. Since then, there had been massive changes. Lancashire was on special measures, and they were on special measures for years. And they only managed a 1-star rating after the special measures ceased, the status ceased. Now, in September 2000, I was the assigned social worker on a highly contentious case of baby LF. The mother of baby LF was a vulnerable young woman. She'd been brought up in care. She had no real support at all. And one of the saddest things was she said to me that I was the only friend she had. I had to point out to her I wasn't her friend. I was her social worker, and as such, I would have to do what I had to do, if necessary, which may not be what a friend would want to do. The child was lovely. The mother obviously cared for her. There had been some conflict within the family, which was all resolved. There were many agencies involved to resolve any issues that may have led to concerns. And in September 2000, I went to Preston Magistrates Court with a senior legal rep from Lancashire County Council, Jane Gladstone. And Jane's heart wasn't in trying to get this baby from this mother at all. There was no reason to take this child from this mother. And we went to court, and they lost their attempt to get an order to say the child had to be put into care or removed for any reason or anything of a detriment to the family.
Right, and the they is Lancashire
The
Children's
they is,
Services.
Yes. So I was pleased with the result, obviously. The young mother was pleased with the result. Jane Gladstone, I felt, was pleased with the result. I never saw her again. Shortly after that, a legal rep came to see me in the office, Judy Deering. Now, Judy Deering worked in Lancashire Legal Department, but oddly, I couldn't find her name as a registered solicitor in the law book of the time. Since then, of course, with everything on the internet, those law books are just null and void and they're not held anywhere. Judy Deering was very upset about Jane Gladstone's handling of the case and said to me, well, we want an order. Katrina wants an order. Now, the Katrina she referred to had been a manager in our office, Katrina Pennington, who I will not discredit in any way because Katrina sadly died. She is not here to defend herself, so we're not going to discuss Katrina. But she said, Katrina wants an order. And I said, Katrina can't have an order. She doesn't even work for us. It's nothing to do with Katrina. Judy Deering asked me to alter the information on the child's file, as her exact words were, more in favour of the local authority. I flatly refused to do it. She was extremely annoyed. I asked for some management support. I said, we cannot start altering children's files. I said, this is perjury in a court of law if she proceeds to the higher court. Judy Deering dismissed the magistrates. Her exact words were, we're not listening to them, they're just a bunch of greengrocers. So any magistrate listening will be highly delighted to know that that is what they thought of. They tried to pursue the case through the Blackburn Family Division High Court. And it went on and it went on and it went on. The young mother, imagine, she has no support, she had no friends, no family. What the stress was putting her through. To ensure that there was no sort of little games behind our back where they pulled rabbits out of the hat to say, well, the partner's this and the partner's that. We had the probation service involved with the partner, who was the father of the child. We had the NSPCC do a formal assessment of the father as whether he was suitable to be in the house with the child and the mother. Yeah. We went through every single channel we could, had it all formally presented, and a guardian ad litem was appointed for the baby. The guardian ad litem was Gwyn Pullum, and he was no pushover. He was known to be very strict, not particularly fond of social services, and he came to see the files. He was highly delighted at my recordings, and he went to court as to represent the baby. The mother was in court. I went to court represented by somebody from the legal department who I had never actually spoken to at all. And this was just a preliminary hearing in the Blackburn Family Division High Court, which was absolutely appalling because the magistrates had already dismissed the case. Lancashire County Council had no claim on that baby.
Right. So just moving on a little bit here.
Yes.
So essentially records are altered to achieve what aim? The child's taken away?
Yes. Now then,
right.
Because of what else was going on at the time, I was under the impression that that child was what I called an ordered baby. That, to me, meant that she's a vulnerable young woman. We can take her child off her because we know somebody who is probably more suitable, a real couple who want a baby and they can't have one, so we'll provide them with one.
Right.
That is what I was certain was going on.
And you're mentioning this now. My mind is saying to me, and we over the last 3 years, have been hearing similar stories from parents who are saying that their children were taken away under false pretenses. And the implication is that those children are being taken to order, as you say.
Undoubtedly.
So was that, was that the only case that you dealt with? You had 39, I think it was, serious cases to deal with. Was that the only case where you suspected this was happening, or were there just other cases?
Well, in relation to taking the baby, the baby LF case was becoming quite widely known throughout other offices within Lancashire, and review chairs of case conferences were expressing very concern about what Lancashire were doing to this young woman and this baby. I can't say about other children. I was nothing to do with adoption. My work was crisis child protection.
Right.
What I do know as a fact is that children's files were being altered. Certain children involved highly contentious cases, very difficult cases. Children, two small boys, children SP and SP. A slightly older boy, MB. A highly contentious matter of serious child sex abuse in the case of children BM and KM. And a slightly older boy, again, about 15, child KF. Now, they were what I could prove was altered in the data, the recordings, crucial documents missing from the files, and I actually reported that formally to what was the Social Services Inspectorate, the Director of Education, the Director, of Social Services at the time, who was Pauline Oliver. I took it to Chris Cheetham, who was the Cabinet Minister on the Social Services Committee. I took it everywhere I could. And nobody responded.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right. So we've got one of the most critical subjects, which is child protection.
Yes.
You are pointing out serious wrongdoing, and then your experience of dealing with the authorities who should be protecting the system and protecting the children, as they don't want to know.
No, I mean, the issue was, it's not just the altering of the file, it is the altering of the file to show the detriments suffered by the children, by the authorities.
Yes.
So it's not just the altering of the file, well, we don't like that, so we'll remove it. I'm talking about removing crucial documents that prove serious detriments suffered by the families from the authorities, not from the families, from the authorities.
Right. And
so
then,
that's slightly different.
And then that doctored material, those lies are taken into court and used, which is perjury.
Yes, they are. Yes.
So you started to create waves, that's the description.
Yes.
You started to, would you call yourself a whistleblower at that stage? Or
Not
just
at that
somebody...
stage, no, because I didn't stay long. At the time, I wasn't planning to stay and blow the whistle. I resigned on the spot. I flatly refused to alter any file. I flatly refused to offer perjury in court. LCC went mob-handed to court when the next hearing had been arranged, and the Guardian actually stood up. Apparently, this is what was related to me later, and had to tell the judge. Carol Woods said none of this. He said, I have seen her files. This is not recorded. The judge rapped the knuckles of Lancashire County Council and said, you should have listened to Carol Woods. I had been removed from the case. The young mother wasn't allowed to speak to me at all, under any circumstances. And the only reason I was still around at the time, after resigning on the spot, was because I was working my 2 months' notice, which I was obliged to do at my level.
Right. Now, there's a huge amount around how you ultimately left and the circumstances around that. And we're just, we will try and cover some of that, but let's just move on. There was another incident that started around this time, which was to do with the care of some particularly vulnerable young boys, I think, in the early teenagers.
Yes.
And a piece of land. Just tell us in a little summary about that, and we can then start to join some of this together.
Yes, this is where it gets highly complicated. We were told as social workers that 4 homes for disturbed adolescent boys were going to be closed. They were on a site of 134 acres of land near Blackpool, Lancashire. On the site was also a working farm, a working school, and homes where Lancashire staff lived and had lived for 10, 15 years, brought the families up, the families attended the local schools, etc., etc. And we were devastated as social workers. Well, what are we going to do with our disturbed adolescent boys if we haven't got this facility?
Because Lancashire County Council had a duty of care.
Of course they did.
To care for those boys.
Of course, because some of those boys had nowhere else to live.
Yeah.
They either couldn't live at home or they didn't have a home to go to where they had parents, as we know, parents or carers or anybody else. It was their home. Some of the boys, at least 2 of them, weren't allowed to live at home. Even though they were only like 12 years old, they weren't allowed to live at home. And so we as social workers sort of expressed dismay. Now, at the time, in November 2000, I had seen an article in the Blackpool Gazette saying the home was going to close, the children's homes were going to close. And I pointed out, well, I don't think you can do that because you need a consultation on such a scale of closures as this. And if you've made the decision prior to a consultation, then it's illegal. A large meeting was arranged in late November, leading into December 2000, and I was invited, as were other social workers, if we had clients who were going to be directly affected. For example, I had 4 boys who had nowhere else to live, and
right.
So they lived in the homes on the site. And I'd been to Cuba on holiday, but I wanted to attend, so I attended. I'd prepared nothing. I didn't know what to expect. It was just a meeting as far as I was concerned. And walking in, it was a very well-attended meeting. All the boys were there. The lower-paid staff, such as residential social workers, the caretakers of the site, cleaners, cooks, the staff who were sort of in day-to-day care of the site. Some of the boys who were lucky enough to have families, the families attended. I was the only field social worker in attendance. And I was told later it was because everybody else knew better and stayed away.
Right. So you, at this stage, had really started to cause some waves, to use that expression, because you challenged over the care and safety of some areas of child protection.
Yes.
And now you were quite rightly pointing out that other procedures in relation to this piece of land and the loss of the home, the council wasn't carrying out their role properly. So there was no consultation, and you were bringing that into the public domain. So you're starting now to get some little warning signs from your colleagues.
Yes. After the meeting, I had stood up and said, actually, I don't think you can do this. I said, surely there are human rights here. This is the home for all the people in the houses on the site. We've got 46 staff members here. You can't just sack them. And the boys live in the homes. It's the home. You know, we need to be considering Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, if nothing else.
Right. You warned, you put out a specific
Yes,
warning.
I put that in a letter. But I also said we also need to be considering the Crime and Disorder Act, because we're looking at dangerous children in some of the cases. Right. At the time, staff morale was incredibly low. We had 10% leaving a year, but only recruiting 6%. So the gap was filled by agency staff. And I do not exaggerate when some agency staff walked in and had walked out within the hour.
Is this because they didn't like the culture? They didn't like the management culture?
They couldn't cope with the chaotic disorganisation, what they felt was inept management, unintelligent management, the total lack of consideration about the client group. Right.
Okay. So some of these young boys were considered dangerous, and what did you worry about if they lost their homes? What was actually going to happen to them?
Well, they were going to have to be housed somewhere, which meant they would have to be housed anywhere in the community in Lancashire, right, and with anybody, basically, who would take them, whether it was appropriate or not.
Yeah.
And there were no risk assessments done. It was done with such speed, and that was my concern. I said, I might not be able to stop any of this, but what you need to be considering is the speed with which you're doing it. There is no thought going into this. And I warned in a letter that something serious would happen if the county continued doing what they were doing. I said, and it's going to be attracting media attention.
Right, and subsequently, what did happen?
Well, 2 of the boys, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, recruited a teenage gang in the Nelson area of Lancashire, and a pensioner was murdered.
Right. Well, let's be specific about this, because this lady died as a result of a burglary.
Yes, they recruited a teenage gang and tried to burgle a house, and she died of a heart attack in the process.
As a result of that. But
Yes.
in your opinion, you could see the danger coming.
I could see
and
the
you'd warned
danger.
of it, but Lancashire County Council apparently couldn't.
I'm not saying they couldn't, I'm saying they ignored it.
Right.
Because ultimately, they wanted the site cleared. They wanted the land.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to do, Carol, is just get through some of those basic steps of the story. So, if we just touch on each of the areas so that the audience can see where this has ultimately led to, because it's astonishing what Carol has been through. You're smiling now, but how are you still smiling
It's a sort of hysteria.
after what you've been through? Okay,
Yes.
So you have started to challenge Lancashire County Council. You've started to take proper action to counter the fact they haven't done any consultation. You've been warned. You're getting warned off at work, and eventually you're forced to leave.
Yes.
And then you start to enter a period where you're involved in court cases.
Yes.
Right. Just tell us about how that built up, that you were involved in court cases around your...
We need to make it clear that when I resigned over the baby LF case, I had 2 months' notice to work at my level. It was within that 2 months' notice that I started to consider what I call the filed matter. Right. And I retracted my resignation, realising that if I didn't work there, then I could do nothing about it. And I was concerned about, particularly the boys in my care. I was concerned about 46 staff members losing their job, about people losing their homes, etc., etc. And when management said to me, yes, you're right, keep your mouth shut or you're for it, and followed that up to me in a letter, I was determined that they were not going to speak to me like that.
Right.
The court cases began...
These are employment tribunals.
Yes, yes. Well, there were others, and there have been lots more. But the first time I had tried to pursue the matter of the closure with the local government ombudsman. I knew nothing much about these matters, but I knew about a local government ombudsman. It was a learning process, and I'm naive, but I'm not stupid. And that went on, and he set out the complaint, and he was right, and he picked out, well, there are violations of human rights. And his exact words to me in a telephone call were, we will get them on maladministration, if nothing else.
This is the closure of this area
Yes.
of land and the homes
Yes.
that we're talking
Yes.
about. So no
because of the illegalities of it,
Right.
etc., etc. Meanwhile, of course, I had been forced out of my job. It happens to all whistleblowers. Classic paper on workplace bullying is by Professor Carey Cooper, and it outlines the early stages of bullying in the workplace when, say, management want to work her out. It's a wonderful piece of writing, and I went through and I could identify with so much of it. And one of the early issues is that they start overloading a person with work so that that person feels they can't cope and they leave.
Right.
So they overloaded me with work and I just coped. That makes them more angry. And then you get the personal insults like, we don't like the way you look, we don't like the way you walk far too confidently. Well, I'm a social worker, I'm supposed to be confident about what I'm doing. We don't like the way you dress. Right. I mean, the personal insults start to come. And then the meetings, you are called to meetings. You are sent letters saying there will be meetings from senior management, but no dates are given. That is to raise your anxieties and start to worry
try and destabilise
all the
you.
time to make you more and more anxious. Then you start to doubt yourself. I have never doubted myself.
No. And you've also mentioned that this bullying attitude by the council was being unleashed on some of the other ladies there. There was a black lady in particular who was extremely badly treated. Yes,
Daisy May Morrison and I were colleagues. We weren't friends. I didn't know her very well at all. I could see what was happening to this lady, which I saw soon after I began work. It was Greenbank Street, the office, Greenbank Street in Preston. And she was a large, ebullient black lady, and I saw her hair go grey overnight. I saw her losing weight. I saw her losing her personality. I didn't know what was going on. I did hear the words N, W used against her with absolutely no repercussions for the perpetrators. And I suggested to the lady in question that she come to share my desk with me because I felt if they saw she had some support, then they would leave her alone, or at least ease up. I was then asked to spy on this lady, and I refused to do that as well.
Right.
And I told her, I said, I don't know what is going on. I said, I think they're out to get you. And what I recommend to you is that you do not turn down any work that they put your way. I suggest you do everything you are asked to do. She felt there was something going on, and a lot of it is about racism. They were racist. Now, at one particular meeting, in a violence at work policy meeting, which has to be a joke, Daisy May Morrison tried to raise the issue of racism. And they said, you can't raise that in an open meeting. Well.
Right, so there's more or less a complete disregard of what the law says on certain issues here.
Complete and utter, total disregard.
Okay, right, so that's going on. You're embroiled in the tribunals. You're also starting to effectively fight the council through the ombudsman process and the courts over their action with the land and the closing of the houses. And at this point, you start to experience what can only be described as harassment.
Yes.
Just tell us about the sorts of things that happened.
Telephone calls, trying to coax me back to work, because what the audience need to be clear about is when I was forced out of work because of the bullying I couldn't cope with anymore, and I actually surrendered and walked out on the 28th of August 2001. Prior to that, I'd removed myself under health and safety legislation on the 1974 Act, which does not require a person to obtain a GP note for any illness. It is quite simply, this place of work is not safe for me, and I am removing myself, and I'm not returning until you make it safe for me. It is not safe being bullied. Because I did that, and because I knew that there'd be nobody else to support Daisy May Morrison, I suggested she could do the same. I wasn't advising her. I was just suggesting she could do the same if she felt she needed to, and Daisy May did. Daisy May went on to have a breakdown, a complete breakdown. I supported her in her case for 5 years, as well as running mine. The local government ombudsman case trundled on to Christmas 2001, when after all that had been said to me over the phone and in earlier letters, I simply received a brief letter saying, you were just having a quarrel with management.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's some quarrel.
Okay. But you also started to, well, you had letters sent to you.
Yes.
You're being pressurised at
Yes.
work. When did the trouble start outside work, when you had people who were following you? And
well, that started, I think, earlier than I was aware, because somebody said to me that I was being followed, and I said, don't be silly, who on earth would want to follow me? And then I did start to see things, and neighbours started to see things, because where I live, it's just where I lived, where my house is, it is just 2 pairs of semis, allotments, very dark, and opposite, there's a very small cottage at right angles to the allotments and to the 4 houses. And there is a lane that can take one to the canal in pitch black, or a footpath up to a main road higher up in Lancaster. That lane is called Piggy Lane. And the neighbours had seen what they considered to be just men hanging about in the dark on Piggy Lane. Now, at the time, because I lived on my own, because my house was lovely, and because it was full of antiques and collectibles, and no, I haven't stolen them, I bought them over years.
yeah, we'll explain that in a minute. Yeah.
Yes. They were concerned I was being set up for burglary.
Right.
Now, sometimes cars would arrive and just park outside, and the drivers, always male, would just sit, and then they would drive off after an hour. A favourite game at the time, a car would, because it was a cul-de-sac, it ended in allotments. There were always big fancy cars, and 4-wheel drives were used a lot. And they would turn the car round so that it faced my house. Now, that is putting it at right angles to my house, which is effectively blocking the lane. Sunnyside Lane is where my house is.
Right.
So that they could have their main beams on my front room window to let me know that they knew I was indoors, and it was like, all I could liken it to was Alcatraz with these main beams, and that was a favourite trick.
Now this harassment started to increase
Yes.
as the main court proceedings to do
Yes.
with the action over the closure of the homes and the land
Yes.
increased.
Yes.
And then I think you said to me that it effectively peaked at the time that a well-known name came into the... Well, they lost...
Yes.
Lancashire County Council effectively lost the case. Is that
Yes.
correct? Just in a little clip, just tell us what happened there, because what I want to do is to be able to explain to people how from then on things really accelerated, and
yes.
it sounds like something out of a horror movie. What actually happened to you?
It is, yes. I mean, there's a lot of it I don't ever want to talk about because I don't want to remember it, I don't want to recall it, I don't want to think about it.
Yeah. So just give us what was the trigger in that main court case?
The trigger in that, I had applied after the local government ombudsman, who the audience needs to know, I met in June 2006 and she hadn't made any decision. She had known nothing whatsoever about the filed matter. That was bogus. And it was just one of the men in her office who'd sort of posed as the LGO. Anyway, I pursued a judicial review in the High Court. At the time, I'd also instigated an employment tribunal case in Manchester tribunals for constructive dismissal. Remember, I'm also struggling to fight Daisy May's corner. Daisy May being too ill to do it herself. Now, the judicial review went before Justice Hooper. And by July 2002, I had a 3-page court decision on whether it would proceed. Now, the first 2 pages were pretty disheartening. He couldn't reverse the decision, and all they could do really would be to look at how the decision had been reached. The 3rd page gave me permission to proceed. Right,
and this is the decision for the council to take control of the land and close the homes.
Yes.
And then I'll say at this point, because it's a key point, this is action that the council had already carried out.
Yes.
So the council's in court as if they have yet to take this particular action.
Right, well, but no, that's we're coming to that, because the judicial review was 2002. The actions had already been taken in 2001. Sheila Bridge was murdered on the 30th of June 2001. Because I got the 3rd page to proceed with the judicial review in July 2002, I was asked to a meeting at Manchester Employment Tribunals. Up to that point, they had completely ignored my case to the extent I had asked them, have you been told to ignore this case? Well, in the event it had been, but we'll leave that aside. At that hearing with Chairman Anna Woolley, they seemed to know about the High Court case, which was quite incredible because I hadn't mentioned it. And Anna Woolley told me I could not have 2 court cases running at once. I had to drop either the Employment Tribunal or my judicial review on the filed matter. I believed it because a chairman in a court was telling me. So I believed it. And I wrote to Justice Hooper and I said, with regret, I have to withdraw from my judicial review. I felt it would all come out within the Employment Tribunal case. The substantive hearing was 10 days in March 2003, from the 17th to the 28th of March. On the 28th of March, I was told I had won my case and to expect a remedy hearing. All that was witnessed. Of course I'd won. You can't win any case on perjury, which is all the respondents relied on. In that case, there had been no mutual exchange of documents. I had been forced to hand over to LCC my statement and all my evidence months in advance of the hearing. I was very upset because I said to the court, they're just going to manufacture evidence to discredit me, to disprove everything I've said. Anna Woolley pointedly told them there will be sanctions for perjury. They had Anna Woolley removed from the case. So the substantive hearing, I was told I had won. I had a witness to that. The remedy hearing, I heard absolutely nothing. What I did hear, the local authority had gone to the High Court, seeing the quality of my documents in relation to the corporate manslaughter of Sheila Bridge, which is what I termed it as, corporate manslaughter. You knew about it. These were your actions that led to this. It's corporate manslaughter. And all the other issues involved in the illegal sackings of 46 members of staff, people losing their homes, etc., etc. The local authority had seen the quality
of your work,
of my work, my documents, the proof, because I'd worked very hard at proving the consultation was illegal. I'd looked at white papers, I used the law. It wasn't something that I'd just written up myself. And they went to the High Court to seek permission to seize the land and close the facilities on the site. That was, I think, the 23rd of July 2003.
This was seeking permission for an action which they'd already carried out?
Yes.
Good, right.
Because they were pretending that they hadn't already done it. Because if they could say they had legal right to do it, then of course Sheila Bridge hadn't been murdered as a result of corporate manslaughter, and they had a right to do everything they'd done. They hadn't illegally sacked 46 members of staff, and of course my tribunal case fell down because I hadn't blown the whistle.
Right.
There was nothing to blow the whistle on if it was legal.
Right. This is the point of the point in the particular case,
yes,
where Sherry Blair is used,
yes,
to
yes,
argue Lancashire's
yes, they
County
employed
Council's
Sherry
case.
Blair to represent them in the High Court, to pretend that the
They were playing
actions from 2 years earlier hadn't happened. Sherry Blair knew damn well they had happened. She was lying to the court. Now then, in that, there were other implications. One being that the Charities Commission funded a lot of the work went on within those homes for disturbed adolescent boys. They lost their case in the High Court for the very reasons that I'd told them on the points of law in November 2000 as to why they couldn't do what they were doing. But the Charities Commission, they were then defrauded for 10 years because they had to pretend they hadn't closed the site.
Right.
So, I mean, we've just got so much in there, and I'm an individual, I'm just an ordinary person, and nobody else seems to have worked all this out.
Right. Now, I'm watching the clock out the
Yes.
corner of my eye, so let's just take people through the rest of the story in just bullet points, and then we have a
Yes.
bit of time to talk.
Yes.
But from this point on, things sort of hot up. Now, you were getting some support from the police, and you'd had some help from Greater Manchester Police,
Yes,
who
I
were
had.
getting interested in the case.
Yes.
And you had one particular Greater Manchester policeman who was clearly doing his job.
Yes.
He was then removed, and after that, it appeared that pressure was being put on you to back off from the case.
Oh, yes. I mean, one of the first things was a senior officer from Lancashire Police on my doorstep, Bill Ralphson, who I believe was going to retire quite soon after his visit to me. It's time to consider your health. What about your children? And I said, how do you know I've got any children? And then he said, you can't win. It's coming from the government. And I said, don't be silly. The government doesn't know I exist. Well, unfortunately, they did.
Right.
So, sorry, that was
Go
the
on,
Bill
go on.
Ralphson Lancashire Police. Greater Manchester Police became involved because of what happened in Manchester Employment Tribunals. That was their area. And the main officer involved at the time, after it had filtered down and I was allocated an assigned officer, was Detective Sergeant Andrew Rigby from Bootle Street, Manchester Police.
Right. Now, you succeeded in actually getting a file which clearly impressed them through to Mike Todd,
Yes.
who was then head of Greater Manchester Police.
He was Chief Constable at the relevant time. The file, when Andrew Rigby took documents from me, he laughed. He said he'd never seen as much evidence because by that time, the decision of the tribunal that I had won Given that LCC then went to the High Court, lost their case, my punishment was they changed the decision for me in the tribunal, and they claimed that I had lost and I was going to pay their costs of approximately £40,000. A tribunal cannot force you to pay costs. LCC were so ignorant, they didn't even know they had to go to a county court to force payment. So they thought they'd force it by thuggery. And so the harassment at home increased. I was getting up to 8 letters a day, 6 days a week. The weekends were worse because, of course, at weekend you cut off. You can't contact agencies to complain or to ask for help or anything else. So it's a tactic. Friday and Saturday, the mail is bad.
Right. So Mike Todd absolutely picked up on the evidence as to what has gone on. And we're talking fraud, corruption.
Extortion, demand money with menaces. I mean, there have been various other sort of serious incidents. My family were threatened. There was so much police involvement, but at the time as well, I'd got the London Metropolitan Police involved, who were then sent to warn me off, and it all started to become very police-orientated, which puzzled me.
Right, but let's emphasise this.
Yes.
Mike Todd was trying to help you.
Yes,
you believe.
Mike Todd, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, was sent my file, which file is kept safe, and it shows how other police were involved, and Lancashire Police, why they were involved, the documentation, and that file was passed to him by Judge David Williams of what was then the Social Security Commissioner's Office, which is now the upper tribunals, because Judge David Williams saw what had been going on documentary evidence. He had had me in court. I had to swear the evidence. He was very strict. He checked every minor detail, and he was so concerned. He passed my file to Mike Todd, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, because by that time, I'd had Rigby turn on me. I'd been physically assaulted when I'd gone to Manchester Bootle Street Station in a Sergeant White trying to get me out of the station before a more senior officer heard what I had to say. I'd had false warrants issued for my immediate arrest and committal to prison. And it seemed like I had absolutely nowhere to go. Then Greater Manchester Police Professional Standards, Chester House, became involved with a Chief Superintendent, Brian Davis, who started threatening me by anonymous emails. And I did my homework. I get off my backside and go and visit places and go and check out this and go and check out that. He admitted he'd sent me those emails and said it was the fault of his computer, which was nonsense.
Right, and then Mike Todd dies.
Yes. How convenient.
Under mysterious circumstances. Yes. And then from that time, things really worsen for you.
Yes.
And we end up with a situation where your house is taken from you under false proceedings documentation.
Yes.
And also the police are arresting you.
Yes.
And then you are taken to a psychiatric unit 3 times.
3 times. Different psychiatric units, depending on where I was, and left. Now, the first time, 2010 was unbelievable. They did nothing but arrest me wherever I was, and it was always failed to attend. Failed to attend what? There is no such thing. I had failed to attend nothing. Now, one arrest was because I had sent a letter to somebody I didn't even know existed. Oh, it was just ludicrous. Everything was just manufactured. But on one arrest, and this was August, the 5th of August, 2010, the Metropolitan Police picked me up. They'd arrested me for failed to attend. That day, I had with me my driving licence. And one officer saw the licence going through the bag as they check all your contents of your bag and such like. And he said, "But this is you." And I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, Lancashire Police have sent us your photograph with a different name."
Right.
But they still locked me up.
They still locked you up.
Yes.
But that was a theme that continued through these incarcerations because you were able to learn that at several times they were trying to create a different personality for you. So you were disappearing into the system and nobody was too sure whether it was Carol Woods or Carol Woods with the E.
Mrs. and changed my title Ms to Mrs.
Right.
Carol, my name has no E, they add an E. and Woods. Now, you say Mrs. Carol Woods, it sounds exactly the same as Ms. Carol Woods. But to do this person, she became the mirror image of me, but in reverse. So you're looking at me, so where I have 4 children, she has none. She likes young men, and this is why I'm hounded by every yob in any area, etc. Heavy drinker, heavy smoker. Of course, I don't drink, I don't smoke. Everything that's the opposite of me, she is. Now, I have seen, and I've shown you, documentary evidence where they run 2 sets of records when they're holding me. One in my name and one in the name of Mrs. Carol with an E. Woods.
Right.
That is common. The council run at least 2 sets of records. But in 2010, the police didn't know what to do with me. They couldn't present me anywhere because I was me. I wasn't the person they'd been told to arrest.
Right. For this to happen, we are talking about a serious collaboration, and in fact, it's a criminal conspiracy, is the right expression to use, between the local authority.
Yes.
Certainly with the local authority legal team.
Yes.
We've got the ombudsman organisation included in it. We've got the court system included in it. This is prevalent right through all the systems that we believe as member of the public are there to protect us.
Yes.
And of course, you started out by exposing what was actually going on, not just failings, but a calculated attempt to falsify records to the detriment of the lives of children.
Absolutely.
So this is unbelievably serious. The last incarceration, you were in a mental institution for 3 months.
Yes.
And I believe I'm right in saying that you got out partly due to the public pressure once people knew where you were.
Absolutely, because in every single lockup, incarceration, I have been held under different names. I have literally disappeared off the street. My family have reported me as a missing person, and the police who have been responsible for all this have said, Carol Woods, never heard of her. I have been held under different names: Carly, Kirsty, Caroline, Mrs. Carol with an E. Woods, all sorts of anything to hide me, and I mean that literally. Effectively, I disappear. And this last time, because of the publicity, people knew where I was. The staff became aware that people knew where I was. And I was told, you're not allowed to make phone calls, you're not allowed to accept phone calls, you're not allowed to stick your nose out of the door, you're not allowed visitors. Right. I was entirely cut off. It didn't matter. People were ringing, people were letting them know that they knew that I was there and it was me. And
that made a difference.
That made a vast difference, right. A huge difference. I can't tell you the difference that made. Right. Because also psychologically to me, for the first time in years, I had some support. I cannot tell you, because over the years, friends are either bought off or scared off, and family are scared off. And I have to stay away from people because they suffer reprisals if I don't.
Right. They suffer reprisals because you've attempted to do exactly the right thing, which is to expose wrongdoing and tell the truth.
Yes.
Now, we're coming to the closure. We are going to do more with you, but I think it would be fair to mention one MP tried to help you, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Norman Baker.
Just tell us a little bit about
Norman
that.
Baker's a really decent man. Now, because I'd seen a TV interview of Norman Baker, and Norman Baker always believed that David Kelly had been murdered and had publicised the fact, and I thought, that's the man for me. But he always said, you need to come and live in Lewes. I can't do anything for you unless you live in Lewes. So in March 2011, I went to live in Lewes. I stayed in a guest house in Brighton for 2 or 3 days, checked out Lewes, found a room to rent, rented a room. And after the first day, I went to the office on East Street in Lewes, made an appointment to see Norman Baker, which was going to be in Polegate the very next Saturday. Right. And off I set. And the police were waiting to arrest me to stop me doing that. But I'd anticipated that. And from that day and for 3 years after, I didn't move out without a rucksack full of ID documents and a briefcase full.
Right.
They couldn't arrest me because I was me.
Right, now he was able to ask some questions
Yes.
in the house about
Yes.
you. And when he did that, the pressure on you increased. Was that right?
Oh, the pressure was unbelievable because Norman Baker's question was, let us suppose this lady lost her house and assets of £400,000 legally. He said, why did they wreck her house? £70,000 was knocked off the value of my house in 2 hours on the afternoon of the 27th of October 2008 by thugs ripping out the whole of the expensive ground floor double glazed windows. They had smashed their way in through my lovely period stained glass front door. They were drilling walls. They were demolishing any sort of anything that looked like a bit of a building. They were looking for documents. They have never got the documents.
And these were thugs who were supported by the police?
Yes. The neighbours were crying, upset, why are you doing this to her, etc., etc. And one of the police officers, Jim Edmonds, who was a PC, who poses, if he can borrow a jacket of a sergeant, he poses as a sergeant. But on one arrest of me in the street, he posed as an inspector. He was there in a borrowed PCSO car. There was another one who I believe is Sergeant Pinder. I could be wrong, but Pinder is a nasty piece of work who had tried to manufacture a phone call with me on another matter which they were going to arrest me on. He's a nasty piece of work and a bully. Now, he was there warning neighbours, if you try and stop any of this, if you try and offer Carol any help, we will arrest you. They had no legal jurisdiction whatsoever to be anywhere on my property. I have asked over 100 times, please send me proof that you had legal jurisdiction to be on my property on any date at all, but especially on the 27th of October 2008. There is no legal jurisdiction.
Right, Carol, I'm going to say thank you very much for telling us that. So for the audience, next door, as I sit here next door, piles of documents of evidence supporting everything that Carol has said. And in over 3 hours of talk, Carol clearly has a very professional attitude to the problems she's come across. She has a fantastic memory and attention to detail. And I have certainly found nothing wrong with you at all, apart from the fact that obviously you've had the courage to stand up to be counted when you've seen wrongdoing. So what have we learnt out of this? We've learnt that something extremely unpleasant is going on under the surface through British public service and the police and courts in particular. But when things have been particularly bad for Carol, as she's just described, it's been the support of the general public that's made the difference. And part of our reason for bringing Carol into the UK Column studios and to get her face in front of a camera is so that the wider British public knows who this very brave lady is. And we're going to say to everyone who watches this programme, we need your help to give this lady the support to make sure that she isn't continually bullied and harassed by Lancashire or indeed any other police forces. Thanks very much for joining us.